Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's guest is Jason Miller from Native Liberty. He's a Native American man, and he is speaking out against critical social justice as it is infiltrating his community. We also talk about that community, which is actually a whole bunch of communities. Native Americans are a diverse set of cultures that are treated singularly by our central government. We talk about the economic factors of that, the policy matters of that, and I get a great basic education about the Native experience within America, and also get to dive into Jason Miller's mind. He's a very smart man with a blue-collar grounding. Best of both worlds here. And if you want to have more time with him, do check out his channel. Filled and becoming more and more fuller of great content. This guy is a really solid dude. So without further ado, here is Jason Miller from Native Liberty. You have so many books behind you.
Oh, yeah. That's pretty much my life. Yeah. Glorified nerd.
What put you on that path?
Probably when I was in my late 20s. I just started, I don't know, like I felt like I was, to use Kierkegaard's, the three stages of existence. I felt like I was in the first stage for the first, like 20-something years of my life, or like 25, 26, the aesthetic stage, where it was just about living for the Friday, living for the weekend. And then after that, it just kind of just like, I'm going to get more engaged and involved. So I just started reading more and more and more. And it just became a thing into itself, I guess you could say. So, yeah.
So it was kind of just a general feeling. Were there like specific incidents that kickstarted you on that? Or you got painted into a corner in a bar fight and you're like, I could have talked myself out of that if I had some Kierkegaard on my shoulder.
Well, for me, it's actually, you know what? It came down to at that time, I was trying to look for a church to go back, start getting back and try to go back to church, because I had walked away from the church at like 16, 17. Mm-hmm. And then I felt like, I don't know, I was married at the time, and I felt like I needed to find something to ground myself in. And I remember, and I've talked to a lot of people about this, but at that time I was searching, and every time I kept coming across, and no offense, but like these very heavily evangelistic churches where it's all about proselytizing and getting the message out. And I was just like, man, there's got to be more to this. Isn't there some more depth to it than this? And I felt like I was searching and searching. I actually stumbled across a guy named R.C. Sproul on this one Legionnaire Ministries. And he spoke about the self-existence of God. He used the Latin term aseity. And he went on to these classical arguments for the ontological argument and, the Kalam cosmological argument, all these arguments. And I was like, I've never heard this. And that started me down the path of philosophy, from that one entry. And then from there, it was branched out to economics, and then just everything from that point, it was like constant, So, yeah.
Wow. That's fun.
Yeah. How about you? What's the Evergreen incident? Or just
is that the pinnacle of my intellectual existence?
No. I watched you did your episode on it was your live stream, and you were just kind of you were talking about David Foster Wallace, and it was fascinating. Your insights, and then you were talking about your novel. I was like, I was blown away. I was like, I was really watching. I actually went back and watched that Charlie Rose interview that he did because of you, and I was like, this is so good. It was such a gift, such a gift. So yeah.
Yeah. Wow, we lost a big one.
Definitely.
Yeah. You know what? I have to be completely honest and just say that ever since I started doing this YouTube thing, which was in June of 2017, my attention can't interact with the page anymore. I'm in this audio video world now, and I don't know how to break out of it. Yeah, I'm kind of slowly weaning myself off of social media in a way. But whenever I find a book that's interesting, I usually go through audiobook. And then if I'm interested, I'll end up trying to get the author on to interview them before I even finish the book. So I'd rather just talk to the source. So I'm learning a whole lot in conversation, and it's a different
medium.
It's kind of a different, it's a different medium. It might be kind of a different ballgame than the book. But I was heavily invested in all types of fiction before then, and up into and including my evergreen education, where I started going deeper into theory of literature, critical theory, criticism.
Yeah. Well, see, that's the thing, is that's where I also got into. Eventually, on my channel, I want to explore some of the great works of Western civilization. The great books. I'm heavily invested into that. I mean, I've read a lot of native stuff as well. I like Joy Harjo. She's a native poet from the Muskogee Nation. Mm-hmm. But I love my favorite book is the Aeneid, and then Paradise Lost, and Henry V. Those are all my classics. The Song of Roland, The Dream of the Rood, The Beowulf. Lord of the Rings. So that's my plan, is to eventually. Because I really believe that with this, critical race theory, this wokeism stuff, we need to not only defend, but we need to show people why, Western civilization, it's got its foibles and its failures, but it's also got its greatness, its ability to revise itself. And so that's one of the things I have planned for the channel. Like right now, if you go to my channel, it's pretty much 5 or 6 videos of just attacking critical race theory, identity politics, but I've got way more planned. So yeah.
Yeah. Definitely. I was speaking with, I was in a, kind of a Zoom call or whatever with a bunch of dissidents who are, speaking out in their respective areas. And I've actually had a lot of those people on my channel. Actually, I've had them all on my channel except one. So you kind of know, like, the kind of person I'm talking about. And they were all kind of saying that they're getting tired of doing this, and this is really taking a lot out of them, and that there's a lot of stress involved because their jobs are on the line, or there's all these legal concerns that they have. And I just said, if no matter like how important this fight is, and it is important, you have to nourish yourself. And if you have a platform, you're being invited to nourish others. And so it just ties a little bit of your attention and your time and your audience's time toward what you really love. Art, music, philosophy, psychology, and stuff like that. And let's just reestablish the academe, in meaning, that garden where Socrates spoke. Let's reestablish that. Let's have our symposiums, and the attention will follow. I mean, not the accreditation, not the institution, but we will be making meaning. We will be making content that will outlast, because it's a part of a tradition that has lasted, this current moral panic, insofar as this moral panic doesn't have something that will last inside of it other than just imminent destruction of everything.
Something pops out of the head of Zeus. Exactly.
Yeah, who knows? But so speaking of your channel then, and I'd like to, kind of just meditate on your criticism by grounding that in why you wanted to speak out. Like, what prompted you to take a stand?
Well, I was familiar with it happened. I think it was in 2015 with I think it was happened at Yale University, where the dean got yelled at by the students. I saw that video, and then I saw, I think it was the Peterson phenomena when they went off on him about the pronouns, and then Evergreen when it just exploded, and I was like, and at the time I was still kind of like, this is just the university. This is the kooky Berkeley-esque kind of, this is just isolated incident. And then I went and I saw Lindsay on Rogan's show, but it wasn't until I think the whole perfect storm of the lockdowns, the COVID, the George Floyd incident, all of that just seemed to explode. And then I was like, wait, I'm totally supportive of peaceful protesting, but when you start burning down private property, hurting, citizens, I thought something's not right here. So I really thought, okay, it's time to dust off all my postmodern books and some of the critical race theory I had read a long time ago. And I just thought, so that was the part of it. But on a personal level, I worked on the same reservation for I think it's 23 years now. So I have a lot of Native friends. I have thousands of friends, and not thousands, but a lot of Native friends and acquaintances and colleagues and stuff that I've known for a while now. And throughout the years, they've trusted my opinion. They would come to me like, what's going on? You know, my so-and-so, I don't want to say their names, but my daughter, my son's gone off to college and they've come back radicalized. You know, I don't know them anymore. There's splits in the family. I mean, it's actual splits in the family now where I had one buddy of mine who, he said in his own household, his two daughters won't talk to him anymore. And it's like, it's at that point where and any little comment, he feels like he's constantly under criticism. Anything he says, it's just like the purity standards in his own household is like just through the roof. And so they were asking me, what do you think about this? And I said, well, you know, so I figured I'd start the channel really just for my friends, you know, just to be able to get, you know, some of the research I did and get it out there. And it just kind of took a life of its own, beyond what I was actually, I expected maybe 40, 50 followers, you know, subscribers. And I look at, like, it's like I'm at 600 now. Like I didn't expect that, but I'm glad.
Well, may it not stay there after you're done talking with me and then get on, I don't know, Rogan yourself.
Oh, yeah, I don't think that's going to happen.
The Weinstein poaches my content, and so does Trigonometry. So there's a path towards Rogan if you keep this up. I'm just trying to warn you at this point.
So yeah, that's kind of how it came about, I guess. And then in my own, you know, my daughter's 22 and I have a son who's 17, and they're exposed to it a lot. I didn't realize how the influence of social media. I'm an old school Gen Xer, and so I mean I'm at that cusp where technology is something I'm familiar with, but it's like I can just put it down. With them, it's constantly. And my daughter was here yesterday visiting us, and she was just, it's everywhere, and it's like they're like TikTok. They're showing me. I'm talking to Dawn. Mm-hmm. She was saying that she sees her daughter's phones, and they have like every 15 seconds a new video about non-natives checking their privilege. It's like, what is this? What is going on here? It's like this is
and
it's like, so you get enough of that through osmosis, you just start, okay, this is a real thing. You know what I mean? It's like, wait, no, it's this. There's way more to this than going on, and it's a very simplistic, reductive view of reality. So, yeah.
Speaking of the natives, and you saw this at Evergreen. I saw it at Evergreen too. There's I don't think it's appropriation, but there's like this melding of the local tribes with Evergreen, and there's like kind of history there, and they help one another. And but with regards to there's this acronym BIPOC, they call it, right?
Yeah.
So the Black Liberation Movement is leaning heavily on the indigenous movement and a lot of their evocations of the sins of America. And that evocation of sin of America is where they get most of their power. That's their entry to power. And then to, getting people to agree with them or forcing people out that don't agree with them for all those tricks. But they lean really heavily on the indigenous community while still, in my estimation, and I'm this is just the bias that I have, and by bias I mean just the narrowness of what I can actually consume. I don't see a lot of natives taking this up in and of themselves, other than being kind of marched out. So, do you think? I mean, it's very infectious stuff, and this generation, your children, the generation after Generation X, are being steeped in it and trained in it. I'm wondering, where do you think that will head for the Native community? If you feel comfortable speaking, as this community.
First of all, I don't speak on behalf of the entire. I view that, if anything, part of the inherent this one size fits all model that the federal government has instituted on tribes. Okay. And I look at that as I don't mean you, but I mean like that concept as more of a paternal. It's like inherent paternalism, and so when I look at critical race theory, it's the same thing. They're trying to appropriate indigenous people for their cause, and it's like that's one of the reasons why I want to speak up against it, because it's like, no, this has ramifications beyond really negative, horrible stuff for society, and this that's why I start off my videos with a quote from Chief Joseph, because in that quote he's talking about equality under the law for all of us, a common humanity. And that's what most of the traditional natives, they appeal to, this natural law, this common humanity, this common theme that we all share in. And that's like what Martin Luther King, the same thing. That's what, and I tell people, like, if you come to me and you tell me you're experiencing oppression or racism, and you show me, but you're what's going on, and I believe you, it's because you've appealed to our common humanity. But the moment you pretty much talk down to me by saying I can't understand your lived experience, then we're locked into our own intellectual wasteland, intellectual ghetto, if you will, and we can't cross that divide then with this standpoint epistemology. And I don't think Native people, a lot of the younger generation, have really thought it through. Like, this is actually giving like political power or credence to actual racist ideologies already. And it's like, what I was talking to my daughter, it was about maybe 3 months ago, excuse me, and she had mentioned kind of what we're talking about. And I said, my biggest fear is what if the so-called dominant group in society takes seriously this critique, this critical race theory, and says, you know what, you're right, part of my dominance is that I don't listen to an inferior group of people. And instead of relinquishing, they double down on tyranny. You know what I mean? Or they double down on it. And it's like, you're actually empowering, because of the standpoint of epistemology, this lived experiences, you're actually giving power to these racist critiques of society. And it's like, no, this could start like a hot war or a race war. And I want to avoid that at all costs. I've read enough history to know, like, the French Revolution, what's happened. And it's like, ideas have consequences. I mean, I've heard people say, no, it's just an idea. It's like, that's the most dangerous part of it. It is an idea. It's infectious. It catches on. And once it catches on, we've got to stop it now in the theoretical stage. I mean, it's kind of already wedded to power as it is now. But if we can stop this, and try to mitigate it, then we can hopefully save our civilization, is how I look at it, our customs and traditions. And I think there's enough within the Native community that if we can tap into that as Native people, that there's this whole, I was going to say cornucopia of ideas that really stand the test of time, because they're appealing to basically liberal values, the liberal order of things, the classical liberal values of an open society of freedom. That's what they're constantly appealing to, is that treat us the same as you want to be treated under the law. There should be exceptions for different classes of people. And I think going down this other road we seem to be heading down is like that's going to all get done away with, and it's just not good. So,
If the BIPOC acronym and all of the activism that's appropriating the indigenous story is doing so because the indigenous story does have a very strong claim of oppression, and therefore a claim of resentment or reparation. How have you seen the various Native tribes survive the temptation towards resentment and forge something that is not of that path?
Good question. Let's see.
Historically.
Well, I think that there's and see, I think this is where how can I say it? There's things within critical theory that I actually do agree with, and there's even certain postmodern ideas that I agree with, where I think like within critical race theory or critical legal studies, to be more specific, I actually do hold to what's his name, the interest theory, interest convergence theory of Derek Bell, and I hold to it. But it's I uproot it out of that critical race theory and apply it within the lens of a classical liberal order. So I look at it through the lens of that. Yes, there is oppression, and there is an interest that. Man, how am I trying to say this now? I'm like really nervous for some reason. Sorry, but yeah.
Remember, this is a conversation.
I know.
So
I know.
just have to stash that.
So how I apply that is that I apply the interest convergence theory to the government. That the government is the one that emboldens these plans and this idea. And there is, like Gramsci, there is this hegemonic power, but it's not in groups of people. it's it's consolidated in this one size fits all governmental model. And to me, that where I look at for that. So, what was your question again? Because I kind of went off on a tangent.
No. I think you're building a case. Ultimately, I want to see to what degree, and again, it's not one size fits all, but what are some aspects of indigenous culture, indigenous life, indigenous spirituality that are resilient and resistant to resentment specifically?
Yeah.
But
no,
you use history to apply that. Like how has it been applied in treaties and stuff like that?
Oh, definitely. There's, I was going to say, I could go, one route would be like humor. It's huge in Native culture, a sense of humor. It's almost that resilient sense of humor has enabled Natives to bend and flex, but not break. Even though they've suffered such horrible tragedies throughout the history of the United States, from the Trail of Tears to the Dawes Act, to the assimilation era, and finally you come to to go towards your question. You have the sovereignty phase, where we're a self-determination era within Native history, where they start talking back to the government. They learn the system, if you will, and that's when they start applying the law back to itself and saying that we want equal treatment. And there's this whole rich literature. Actually, hold on. I have a book right here.
Yeah, what era
so like there's
what
this
decades
right here.
we're talking about this self-determination?
Yeah, so there's like there's a whole group of books out there that are based around learning the language, learning the culture, the legal system, and using that to empower the reservation, their sense of autonomy and reasserting themselves. And that goes on during the self-determination era. And so you see
Could you have some dates for this era?
Oh, yeah, that would probably be from about the I would say, when was 1970s? I would say actually 1976 up until now. Specifically with one case, the Brian v. Itasca case, where he was a Minnesota Chippewa tribe member, and he had his trailer on him and his wife on tribal land, and they received a letter in the mail that they owed back taxes, like it was $147.95 to be exact. And he took it to his district court, and then they lost. And they appealed it to the Minnesota Supreme Court, they lost, and they got appealed to the Supreme Court. And it was a unanimous decision that, the state of Minnesota does not have the right to tax Indian land. This goes back to another law, Public Law 280. But at that time, I think it was Justice Brennan wrote in the holding that states don't have the right to tax native land. And also, that actually opened up the door for bingo, and opened up the door for gaming. And then that also opened, then those are wonderful things in itself, but that opened up the door for the reassertion of sovereignty. Is actually the root that lay underneath that. It was a reaffirmation of sovereignty. And from that was like a wedge in the legal system, if you will, that empowered Native American tribes once again So that was, and then from that point forward, it's just been kind of victory after victory. But there's also, this is the whole thing with Native law. It's just, there's not any one overarching interpretation of it, because it's every state has a different relationship with their tribes in that state. Yeah. And the federal government has a different relationship. Like my own tribe, the Hopi tribe, and my mom's tribe, the Crit tribe, they're like the Mojaves and Chemehuevis is where my mom is from. This is the Colorado River Indian tribes. Before it was just the Mojave and Chemehuevi tribe. And then that was founded, I think, in 1865 or 1868. And then in the 1930s, they were told by the BIA, 1940s actually, told by the BIA, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, that if you don't get more natives into your enrollment, you're gonna lose your tribe. And this happened across the board. So a lot of tribal constitutions if you look at them, they just mimic the federal government's constitutions. It's like this top-down approach. And so they lost a lot of their traditional governmental models. This is a part of that one-size-fits-all. Yeah. And so what happened is you had the Mojave and Chemehuevis opened up their tribe to two other tribes, which is the Hopi and Navajo. And so at this point, and this is another thing, which is why I'm very adamant about like limited government, is that so my grandparents, they actually met in boarding school. They were shipped away to boarding school. That was a whole other thing in itself. This is part of the assimilation era. And my grandfather used to, when I was a little boy, he used to tell me that he remembered if he spoke Hopi, he'd get his mouth washed out with soap. They cut all their hair. It was just this horrible experience. And so he met my grandmother there, and she was Miwok, from the Miwok tribe, and they actually eloped and got married, so they wouldn't get sent back to the boarding school. And so they got married at 15 and 16. And then they went back to the Hopi land, to First Mesa, to Walpi, and then they built a house beneath Walpi, and it was called Five Houses because it was just 5 houses. And then at this time, in the 30s and 40s, there's word going out that there's land available down here on the Crit Reservation. So they travel down to the Crit Reservation, they relinquish their membership in the Hopi tribe, become Crit members. And so there's this constant, my broader point is there's constant entanglement of the federal government, of this like gigantic apparatus, always like screwing with or messing with tribes. Yeah. And it's throughout, you see it all the time. And so even today, trying to into my point here is that there's what am I trying to say here? That the government is constantly trying to reassert its power, and so there's no monolithic interpretation of Indian law because of that fact. Every state, every statute has a different effect on Native culture. So that's why and this is why it's really important, because if there's a certain injustice that's happening on a reservation somewhere, before they take that case to their local court, they have to be very careful and get with the other tribes and consult to make sure that what if this actually case does go all the way to the next level, because this could affect not just that one tribe, but the entire Indian country. Okay. And this could have a horrible negative effect. So you almost have to live, like there's a famous book by, I think it's a David Wilkinson, and there's a Charles Wilkinson, and he talks about the Supreme Court's like a loaded weapon, like the cases of the Supreme Court, and like you got to be careful because they go, it could go off at any time. And so you've got, I think he's quoting from Supreme Court Justice. I think the case is Korigatsu versus United States, or Korigama versus United States, and he's quoting that, and he's trying to make the case that when we, or as Native people, bring anything a case, we've got to be very careful because this could affect the entire Indian country. So yeah.
That slows down the wheels of justice. That's very inefficient.
Mm-hmm. Well, that also goes. Oh, go ahead. Sorry. Oh no, I say that also goes back to the Marshall trilogy, the famous Chief Justice John Marshall, his 3 cases. Like Johnson v. McIntosh was the first case where he ruled that Native Americans have a right of occupancy to the land, but not a right of ownership. And so it's like, wait, okay, and that's to me is like a form of injustice. Like you can live on the land, but it can be taken from you at any time. So you don't have fee simple title. And so that's why, for me, that's why I kind of got into economics. As I'm studying it, I'm thinking, wait, why is that you have a city here and then right next door a reservation, and you have booming prosperity and wealth creation, and then here you have, third world poverty and grinding poverty. Yeah. And so I started looking at it and thinking, I know it's not the people, it's not the ethnicity, it's not the color of their skin, it's not their brain power, it's the institution. It's the institution of the reservation system itself. It's all these formal institutions that are stopping the ability to create wealth and to prosper and succeed in the 21st century. And so there's a lot of, like I said, there's so many different avenues of federal oversight, you could say, and that's where I apply critical theory or critical race theory. I don't apply it to a group of people or someone's color of skin. I apply that for myself personally to the federal government. That's what I kind of created my channel, is like take some of these tools, uproot them out of this goofy worldview system and apply them within the classical liberal worldview system.
Very precisely.
And then we can, exactly. And then we can hone in on the injustice, and then like Brown versus Board of Education can go against we can make amends or tear down like the Dred Scott decision, the same kind of way, and we can do that. You can apply that same principle within Native countries the same way. So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
I'm sorry, I was kind of hogging the conversation.
No, there's no hogging. It's your conversation.
That's another thing is like Natives are really, I wouldn't say shy, but they're just really cautious, apprehensive, and so it's like, it's like the people that I know that I have on my show, I've known them for years, so they're comfortable. But it's like I'm having the hardest time getting the people on my show, because they're like, oh, dude, I don't want to talk. And that's like how I feel now. It's like, okay, this is what it's like being on the receiving end.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
No, it's all good. So,
yeah. There's a couple thoughts that I had. What you were just saying was that if critical theory is misapplied within an entire generation of Native youth, then they will start to tear down the structures that afford them progress.
Exactly.
In a way.
Exactly.
So instead of reforming the law, and actually not even reforming the law, but demanding that the law is applied equally to them, as you were outlining, they will tear down the whole structure. There will be nothing to work with.
Exactly. Yeah.
Except for these power dynamics. And if you see down the road with how intersectionality works, it ultimately does corrode every culture by demanding across the board acceptance of all these competing worldviews, including gender. Like, I don't know to what extent any given, this is very low hanging fruit, but when I was at Evergreen and I was learning about intersectionality and seeing all these activist groups work together and watching like how the gender ideology was very dominant, I'm like, well, what happens when a traditional Native society that has, a very particular relationship with between males and females and different ways of describing that comes into conflict with queer theory, which sees that as completely oppressive. So that will erode from the very root of culture, which is the interrelationship between men and women. Yep. It will erode that entire culture. So, to teach the young people to be very careful with this stuff and to direct it directly at, the overextension of law or the misapplication of federal law or demanding that the federal law reform itself, due to these kind of critical theory techniques. To apply that would be correct. To apply it to culture, to the white man, maybe not, will actually start to have all these inverse effects later on down the road.
I agree with you totally. It's like, like I'm working on a series right now on more of a nuanced perspective on natural law, but because natural law has also been abused. It's not that simple. There's, like if you go back to the Marquis de Sade, sadism, he used natural law to justify that we could be as brutal as we wanted to be. And so it's like, before you can have a natural law, you have to, you carry with you like your worldview, your presuppositions, and that's how you interpret natural law through. So it's not as simple as just affirming natural law, but I agree with you totally. Like there's within Native culture, you hit a point where you said, what was it you said? You just said something. This is what I do. Women? Yeah, this is what I do. People will talk to me, and I'm like, okay, yeah, my mind is going, and that's like, okay, it just drops out of my head. It's like as you're talking, all these thoughts are sparking around in my head, and I just forget. Like, oh, great, this is wonderful. I'm
very much like that too. You're in good company.
Okay, good.
Yeah. We were talking about like the roots of culture and queer theory coming up against like a Native culture, and there's my other insight. And we'll just throw these things out. We can just scattershot. Like there's no linearity here. We can be completely
sounds good.
Word association and just pick up and turn over ideas, forget them, and then watch them come back. But one thing I was just thinking, like listening to you speak, there's an element of spirituality that is about connection, and I don't know anything about Native spirituality, but earlier you were talking about Christianity, so I assume like that's something that attracts you.
Yeah. Well, this is what I was going to talk about. So, within Native culture, it's like there truly is a natural diversity. There's no such thing as like a monolithic Native culture. Like within my own family, my great aunt was the first. Or was it my third great aunt was the first Hopi to translate the Bible into Hopi, so that like affected our family, right, our course of history. And then the 16 Hopis, the families that traveled to the Mojave and Chemehuevi reservation, they became part of the church structure down there. and so that's filtered. My lineage comes from there, but also even like tribes themselves. Like the Hopi tribe is matriarchal. Most public are matriarchal. Some are patriarchal. Some have their governmental model is horizontally based, and some are vertically based. Some rotate amongst families. Well, like even the Hopi, if you say the word tribe, it really isn't applied to the Hopis because they view themselves as separate clans. They come together as Hopi people, but it's separate clans. So even there's like a great diversity of opinion and thought. So if somebody is native and they're Christian, or someone's native and they're Jehovah's Witness, and native and they're into their traditional spirituality, nobody looks at them as like, oh, you're not really native. There's even tribes that still exist today, like I think the Miwok tribe. Certain parts of the Miwok tribe, they don't have federal protection. They're not considered a federally recognized tribe, but we don't consider them. We don't say, oh, well, you're not native. It's just because you don't have that laminate card that shows that you're tribal Indian. As long as, and that's where another thing is, like, as long as tribes have the autonomy to define who's a member of the tribe, that's fine by me. That's how it should be. If you want to go off blood quantum, or if you want to go on lineage, or you want to go off both, that's your determination. I think that should be left to the tribes, and it shouldn't be dictated from on high, from the top down. And that again is where there's this great, like I said earlier, this great diversity of opinion and beliefs. And so within like your question of spirituality, there's a whole within Native culture, like the traditional side, there's this like it's really tied to the land. That's really critical. That's almost like, I would say, I want to be careful here and not overstate my case, but I would say that's like a defining characteristics of natives in general, is that they're tied to the land in a way that's maybe different than most people, whereas they can go into the city, work a job, whatever, but they always seem to want to come back to their culture, their customs, their land, what's familiar to them. Whereas, and that's also changing because you have urban Indians to this day. Also, there's a whole bunch of books written about urban Indian life and trying to like cross that divide, where it's how can it, like, there's a famous book by Charles Eastman, and he was I think he was Brule Sioux native, and he actually, I think he went to Harvard and he became a doctor and he wrote a bunch of books, and he was talking about even then the struggle for identity, that he was native and he was living in the white man's world, but he had accepted some of the culture, the institutions, but then as he started seeing some of the injustice that was happening, he went back to his roots, you could say, his spirituality roots. So there's always that interplay there, and I feel like that even in my own life, like one of the reasons why I can't abide by critical race theory is because I'm also half non-native. I'm half white. My dad was German Scottish, so I'm a breed. I'm a half breed. I'm not full blooded, and I've always felt like I had to walk this line between, like, I don't have the luxury of accepting a theory that says half the population is racist, or I don't have that easy anti-intellectual way out of saying that it's systemic racism, it's infrastructural racism, it's institutional. It's like, no, there's not. That's, to me, is again where that should be applied to the branch of the government. That once that theory is applied and then trickles down throughout the rest of society, that's dangerous then. But that's not because of a certain class of people or a whole entire group of people are inherently racist. It's like, I know from my own other side of my family that if anything, there's almost like they look at natives as being exotic and they revere them. Maybe that's a little bit bad too, you know what I mean? But it's the opposite direction, where it's like they hold them in high respect. I mean, that's the thing, is you're always going to have those people who are like this continuum, right? The spectrum, who are going to always be racist, and no matter what you do or say, they're going to be that way. But that doesn't mean that everybody is that way. So yeah.
I don't want to bring up this. This is so stupid, but what's your opinion on land acknowledgements?
Well, what's that? No, what's that? What do you mean?
Oh, land acknowledgements?
Yeah, I don't know.
It's kind of a progressive ritual now that whenever there's a progressive event, they'll start the event by naming that we are on the land, and then they'll call out the native people. It's just this new ceremony.
That's cringy. That's cringy.
You haven't seen it? It's pretty.
No, I haven't seen it. It sounds something very cringy. No,
There's the You were describing something that might give Purchase or a different view or a more nuanced and rich view of what it is to be liberal or what a liberal value is, specifically in the native communities. You have all these differences, and somehow they get along. And in a way, liberalism, classically perceived, is all these differences somehow getting along. There's some sort of protocol of discourse. There's some sort of respect or boundary in judging other people, or you judge them based on one set of things and not on other set of things, such as belief. Belief is kind of what I hear is that I was just trying to think, well, how do these communities operate together? Critical race theory or critical theory would have them operate together against the man. But they've been operating probably somewhat against or in defiance or in resistance. That probably is a part of how the part of the social glue. But it seems like there's something more that is not based on it. Is that correct? Or
I would say, like, my experiences with the two tribes I'm familiar with, or the three tribes I'm familiar with the most, and where I work at too, is there is a strong sense of community. That's just because you grew up there. It's not just a neighborhood. It's you have ancestral ties to the land, and so that you could say that right there is like this. Like Don was saying on the podcast, and I've had other friends say the same thing, that they come together and they have disagreements. I mean, they have like knockdown, drag out fights. I don't know, physical fights, but they go at it. But when they vote on something, they come together as a community because it's about the community. I don't think it's a collective or collectivism. It's more of just an organic community where part of it is that there's disagreements, there's debate, there can be family members that don't like each other, but yet they still come together because it's about the whole community as a whole, what's best for the community. That's kind of like, and ties it in with, and again, that ties back into their, I would say, rich historical heritage, that this is their community and this is their land. They can actually say, this is my grandparent, my great-grandparent, all the way down. They can trace their lineage. And also they do have in common that kind of sense of defining themselves through their oppression in a certain way, and through which is I think is powerful, but that can also be dangerous because you don't want to just tie yourself to something that's negative. You need a positive affirmation of what it is, that who you are, what do I believe in, not just what I'm against. And that's kind of again why I'm critiquing critical race theory and this whole woke movement, is because you really do need to define what it is that you believe in. Because once that fad goes away, and then all you're left with is I'm anti this, I'm against that. Well, then what are you actually standing for? So that's kind of where I think. And I think as far as like native culture, I think I would go again to almost all of my native friends. It's just this, we just click on this. There's this level of sense of humor that is really integral. And actually I'm bringing this up because I'm in the process of trying to write a book on the theory of humor. When I think that like within native culture, there's something unique about their ability to incorporate, like there's the three dominant theories of sense of humor. There's the incongruity theory, the superiority theory, and the relief theory. And I see that as I'm dealing with native people constantly. I see all three elements. It's almost like it's this own epistemological way of viewing the world through the lens of humor. And it's like you see that, and that kind of like I can be at a powwow on the other side of the country or in San Diego and meet someone who's native, and right off the bat we just talk like that. There's just constant. I mean, that's old school, but there's this almost connection that you have with each other. And then as soon as you meet someone at a potluck or at a dinner or whatever it is, you just ease into it. You just know each other, almost like you click quickly. I can't explain it. It's just it's a kind of a cultural thing, But it's also, I think it's beautiful at the same time. It's really it's inspiring because it's like we're all the same. We're human beings, and that to me is like that's the I don't know how to I don't know. This is going into, I'm bringing it in my mind. I'm thinking of Michael Polanyi's definition of tacit knowledge. There's certain things that we may not be able to articulate that are just there, that you can't, you can, like I was telling somebody one time, I can write a treatise on how to ride a bicycle and give you a PowerPoint and everything, but until you actually experience it, there's all this knowledge that I'm not going to be able to capture. And it's like within the sense of humor, I don't know if anybody can actually. I'm trying my best to articulate that, but I don't know if I can.
Yeah.
So,
That's it's tricky. Like, how do you talk about humor without just being humorous? And then, what does humor do to these three theories of humor? Is probably mock them relentlessly.
Exactly. What's the old saying is, as soon as you explain a joke, you've dissected it, you've killed it. Same thing. Yeah.
I think humor and spirituality are something that you feel out, that you can really assess of people. Spirituality is slightly different. It's kind of I don't know to what extent people cultivate like kind of an understanding of where that person is in a kind of, I hate this word, but energetic sense. Like you can kind of feel that, you pay attention to that, and you can feel like either a kind of constriction, kind of a conflict in them, or that kind of thing going on, or power, or a connection, a quietude or peace, that kind of level of somebody. And then the humor is another way of communicating in a way. And then there's a lot of different levels to humor in the frequency of it. Like, is it kind of a worldview? Is it kind of an ontology in a way, like a way of being, or is it kind of a way of playing around with words, or kind of like disrupting things? There's a lot of different ways to do that. But when you do, it's really fascinating that you bring up that humor is something that is, it might be an outgrowth of these cultures having been embattled and then having to subvert it on a very primordial level. That I'm sure that might be a relevant theory, but there's something more than that too.
Yeah,
and
it is.
You find that in Black communities. I'm on this Clubhouse app, and there's a lot of just these Black conversation rooms, and when you go into them, they have a completely different MO of how they interrupt each other and how they laugh and stuff. That in the more intellectual climes, the people are more like reserved, quiet, and more like they don't interrupt as much, or that interruption is discordant in an intellectual argument. Whereas like in this kind of this community of people, they're always interrupting, and that's just kind of, it makes the community really alive and thriving in a way that I don't see a lot in so-called white spaces or in my cultural spaces and stuff. So
and that's funny you say that, because being a breed, I've experienced both. It's like I have a real good Mexican friend lady, and she's always saying that you can blend into both cultures, and I've experienced that where it's like, if I say something that's humorous in a native setting with fellow natives, they'll crack up and we'll laugh and we'll joke, tease each other. And then I go and say that same thing, and it's like they get looks like, oh, that's just inappropriate. Or it's the opposite. I'll say a joke that's really funny in this culture, and I'll say it in another culture, and it's like, that's not even funny. I'm like, it's funny though, man. It's like it's just like I'm trying. It's like there's this constant tension in a breed's mind.
Yeah. I don't know to what extent I'm flexible in that way. I wonder if there's like a way to assess that.
I think that humor is universal. First of all, everybody, if you're a culture and you don't laugh, then like that's really tragic. So I agree with you. I think that there's a definite universal element to laughter, and that's one of the things that I think this is a new discovery that I've found out recently, that most of the philosophers from like Descartes, even all the way up to Nietzsche, they talk about they have a theory of humor within their philosophical system. Nietzsche has the Gay Science book, which is about laughter. Descartes talks about it. Immanuel Kant talks about it. There's all and I was like, I didn't even know this. Like, I'm just used to, cogito ergo sum, or the categorical imperative, and all this, refined language, epistemological language. And then I'm like, okay, this is new to me. So I was like, oh, there's a whole rich tradition here. And it's like, oh, let's tap into this. Let's synthesize this. That's what I am. I'm not a specialist in anyone. I mean, I am by trade a commercial electrician. That's all I am, And I just want. There's nothing special about me, so I'm not an expert on anything. But
you know how to not get shocked at the very, very least.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, so I'm just like I guess you could say like a generalist. I have like a wide, branch of knowledge. I try to inform myself of different things, and I think that, like you're saying, like humor, it's just something that it's almost like you either get it or you don't, and that's and like, you can't explain it. But yeah, I think like you were saying, like there's within what was it, Substack? You said the app you're in.
It's just a bunch of talking rooms.
That's
chambers,
like I know even growing up, like because we ended up settling in Florida, and so I lived next to a black community, Eatonville, and almost all of my best friends were black dudes, and we played basketball and football together. And it's just that sense of humor that just always just cracked me up. I just can't explain it. It was just this whole, it was just richness to it. And it was just like, man, it was just hilarious. And it was constantly making me laugh. And people would be like, look, you even got Jay over there laughing at you. It's like, it's just stuff like that. But yeah.
It really is the visa of culture. If you have a sense of humor, and if you have a malleable sense of humor where you can, that's kind of how I connect to people, is like you kind of fish around to make them laugh. I remember I was, this is in my dark phase, in my nihilistic phase, in my lost to the world, dark night of the soul phase. I was playing a lot of online video games because I didn't want to deal with all the emotions that I had to deal with. And, and on this online video game, you're playing with other people. And I noticed in myself that I'd get into this room with a bunch of strangers and we'd be on voice chat. And I would, like, there was the problem that we're solving, the dungeon or whatever that we're doing. But, like, my real game was, like, seeing if I can get every single person in that group to laugh. So I would keep on, like, making little statements and stuff until I got them all laughing. And then I felt like I felt complete in some way. I felt like I did my job. I got my achievement.
That's good.
So if you can do that, if you're that there's something that you can really connect to people if you can, and then the whole cultural matrix once you get your finger on the nerve of their laughing.
Definitely.
There's something that you said earlier that I think was really interesting. I don't know too much about economics. Unfortunately, I need to do a lot of learning about that. But you said that the federal government said that natives can, be on the land, but they don't own the land.
Yeah, and, it's a right of occupancy.
One of the most important, like the primary building block of the wealth of nations is ownership, is property, is it not? And if you don't have that, then you can't build up. And I think that there's psychological and then actual economic material consequences to that, because if you don't think that you actually own the land, then you're not going to have a relationship of not exploiting it, but of maximizing the potentials within that land.
Exactly. Right? Yeah. Well, that's like there's a actually I think I have it right here somewhere. Yeah, Why Nations Fail. There's a great at the very beginning of it. The two authors, they talk about Nogales, Arizona, and it's split right in the middle by the border. On one side, you have grinding third world poverty, right? On the other side, you have relative prosperity. And he's saying, what's the differences here? But they eliminate, it's not ethnic because it's the same culture, the same skin color, the same religious background, the same customs and habits. And so then the authors start asking the question, what is it that separates these almost identical people? These are identical people, but yet there's this border that's now sitting there, and yet one side is relatively prosperous, the other side is extremely poor in poverty. And they argue that it's the institutions, and it's like the rule of law, the ability to have alienable property, that you can also pull your resources together. And there's I'm also thinking in my mind of Hernando de Soto, wrote a great book years ago called The Mystery of Capital. And he went to third world countries, and he showed how much legal red tape you have to go through just to be able to pull your resources together to get a title, to get actually a formal copy of a title. Yeah. And so people they go around it, and so you have all this dead capital sitting there that could be pulled together, and you could start a business with, or and these things just multiply. And then you see this on the reservation where. Throughout the United States, where you have the right of occupancy, which can be extinguished at any time of the federal government. That's basically what the Johnson v. McIntosh. And then you have the trilogy. You have the what is it? The Cherokee Nation v. Worcester case, and then you have another case. and it's solidified into cement the fact that natives cannot pull their resources together. So you have all this land, and they can, but they have to go and get permission from Washington. So again, that's that paternalistic element. Yeah. Like there was a famous case, I think it was in late 90s, that was finally settled. Actually, no, 2004, I believe, the Cobell settlement, where Eloise Cobell, she was a Blackfoot Indian. She sued the federal government and became a class action lawsuit because all the timber mining rights that natives have, before they can get a paycheck from the leasing out of their land, that money has to go first back to Washington, D.C., and they send it back to the tribes. Well, there was billions upon billions upon billions of dollars. I forget the actual estimate. That was just not accounted for. It was just gone, missing. It was appropriated somewhere, misappropriated. And so they won the case. I think it was $3.4 billion they won, but it was like a drop in the bucket compared to what. And then this is a good example of the entanglement, the patchwork, mazework of the overlapping regulatory structure, is that if you were native, you could get part of, and you could prove that you were affected by the settlement, by the misappropriation of money. So you signed up, and then when you signed your name to it, you get like in the mail, I don't know, $1,000, $1,500, $2,000, part of the settlement. But then what happened is, so the government created another provision where if you signed up to this, you were now on the law books, and your land that you had claimed title to can now also be. So the reason why I know this is because at the time I was dating someone who was Taos, and she was trying to build her house, and it took us 2 years to get all the signatures for the right of way to easement to her property. Huh. And you get to the point where it's like, what's the point of this? Like so it got to the point where she had to send off to. Actually, I was talking to another friend of mine, and she said, what you need to do, and she goes, I hate to say this, but this is what I mean, this is how bad it gets, is that you need to go to a wake or a funeral within the family, and then you'll find all the other old relatives that will come out of the woodwork to attend the funeral, because you can't get a hold of them, because they're either unreachable, they're living somewhere on some part of the reservation, or they moved somewhere else, they had disconnected phone number, but then they find out about a funeral of a family member, then they all of a sudden show up. Well, you need that signature before you can proceed, and we're talking about, like, I have a table here, like 6 foot by 4 foot table. If you have that much land, now you need also their signature and their signature, and so it's just you're economically you're disincentivized from even doing anything. And that's just I remember she finally got her house built, and that was like I remember when she got the paperwork, it was like a celebration in itself just to get that process finalized. But that's what I mean. It's like, it's like the what is it? Squeaky wheel gets the grease. It's the same kind of thing. It's like, and that's just one microcosm example of what's on a massive scale that's constantly happening within the reservation. And it's just like, we've got a system that's broken, and it's not, and it's still that same way. And that's where I'm trying to apply those critical theories, like I said, uproot them and apply them properly. Because I think there's a lot of insight. Like, I even agree with, I know this is going to shock people, but Franz Fanon, the famous sociologist, I don't agree with his violence approach or anything like that, but his understanding of the decolonized mind, and that it sets up like this dichotomy, and that you've used it as a lens to filter like an inferior race through. And then even I agree with something that Edward Said wrote in his book Orientalism, and that there's this concept of the other, and that you see it within the language of Johnson v. McIntosh, and all the way down, even in certain presidents. It's very overtly racist language, that they refer to natives as a savage, as backwards, as inferior, as I think the Cherokee Nation versus the title, I forget the name of it. There's a statement in there where Johnson, the Supreme Court Justice, refers to Native Americans as a ward to a guardian, like we need the approval of the federal government at every level, and that's why I think it's like that right there. If we can cleanse that language and strike it from the Constitution, from the Supreme Court cases, and until that happens, we're still going to be battling this patchwork, mazework of overlapping regulation and laws and legislation.
Yeah, and if you don't do it carefully, you'll just reinstate that language inverted. You'll just call everything white supremacist, and then
and that's I don't want that. That's like, then we're going to bed. It's like, it seems to be from my study of history, my small little is that the pendulum always swings from one extreme to the other. It's like we're only in the middle very shortly. It's like we just go off this way. Like I was studying the Romantic movement, which I love, and it's like Romanticism is a rejection of the neoclassical movement, but then it goes to the grotesque and the absurd, which I still like it, but it's like we're breaking free from the shackles of this. Everything has to be iambic pentameter, and everything's perfectly laid out, and the art has to be form and function. It's like that's still stifling as an artist. And so we can swing the other way, but it's like, okay, great. And then we swing to the far extreme.
Then all of a sudden you're getting syphilis and an opiate addict.
Exactly.
Okay, good job there, Baudrillard.
Yeah.
Not Baudrillard, the other guy. Huh. Yeah. There's a lot of ways to bring light to this and to get people educated in this, in the particular struggles of the Native community, just like brute force education. And by brute force education, I mean just like conversations.
Yeah.
Just having conversations and looking at these things. And it's pretty obvious that what you just laid out now about all that red tape is egregious. It's wrong. And it's also actively destroying capital, by which I mean potential of this community to own itself, to uplift itself. Another thing that I'm worried about with regards to critical race theory is this tendency within certain levels of it, certain thinkers and activists, to cast the entire order as supremacist, right? We need to reject the entire order. So you get to this point where it gets really, really weird, where showing up to work on time, or having a spirituality, or being responsible to yourself, or basing your judgments on merit. All those things are,
the whole Smithsonian document.
These really powerful institutions are promoting this incredibly racist stuff. So it's...
And that's so easily debunked because natives, I think, even I was listening to an episode of Tim Pool, and he's like, I think he's part Korean, and he said, we've had timetables, it's like, we do too. Like natives and indigenous people, minorities have had timetables. We're doing math. Exactly. We had a calendar system. It's not it's not racist to believe in being on time. It's like, there is a difference, I would say, in pace. In a general sense, where there's,
I get that.
Maybe there's definitely not this constant rush that there is. Like native cultures tend to be a slower paced culture because of the upbringing, the ties to the land. There's a lot of other factors where they don't have that sense of like just constantly pushing drive of competitiveness. But it's not absolute. It's a continuum again. It's not like, and so that's like to your point, there's this, it's just like, how do people believe that? I'm literally like, I don't see how this is possible.
It's othering. It's the same principle of othering.
It's reverse. Yeah.
Yeah. It's reversed. And it's kind of, the only way to break that down is to, be adults about it. And also, so there is a lot of work to change the language in the government and to, and even to a certain respect, call out white supremacy where it is, or European-centric thinking, as there's this dominant culture, call that out and take that out. The problem with anti-racism is that it reifies that in another form. It doesn't just like diffuse the bomb. Another thing I wanted to point out, like all that red tape that you were just describing, all this CRT stuff is just going to put diversity officers in that bureaucracy. It's just going to bloat the bureaucracy even further.
Well, my biggest fear is that if natives start buying into it more and more, it's going to tear apart their own tribes. You're going to start seeing division not only within families. We're already seeing now. I know families that like it's the whole reason. One of the reasons why I really started this channel was, like I said earlier, it was a way to get codify what's going on to my friends, my small circle of friends, and then get it out to the people that I work with and people that I know on different reservations. It was just for them, and it's happening now where you see families, the older generation are like looking with bewilderment upon this younger generation. They're like, this is like. And there's some that I think are buying into the older generation because they're like, yeah, that makes sense. This is, the AIM movement, militant. It's like, no, this is not. We don't want this. This is the exact opposite. This will destroy the tribe from within, because then it'll make this, well, like I said before, we have this community-based approach. Well, critical race theory is like this virus that will say, okay, either you're with us or against us. So now all of a sudden we have this artificial split in the tribe, and that'll just get more and more atomistic until we're, well, maybe that's actually the way we have to do it, to eliminate it. It's just isolate the virus, the mind virus, until it's just finally gone. But and before it does that, it's going to do so much damage. And it's like, yeah, you want a unified front, but it's a unified front based upon all this diversity of opinion and beliefs. You don't want this unity that's artificial, or that's just tearing itself apart within the tribe. And that's my biggest fear, is that, and I think and I'm not trying to belittle those people, but I don't think that they've thought this through far enough. They haven't reduced it to the absurd, reductio ad absurdum. And it's like, no, take this idea and actually apply it consistently and see where it leads to. It leads to horrific results. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's different modes of work to counter something like critical race theory, which is, like, to borrow from James Lindsay, it's postmodernism or Marxism, even cultural Marxism. It's like an acid, and if you have the right glove on and you keep it in the right container, you know where to apply it to the rust. Like, it can actually do wonders to work. But anything beyond that, it's going to start corroding everything. So there's a way of countering that by, one, trying to teach people that this is what it does, this is how it operates. So, like this education model. There's the criticism model, which is like the education, but it comes packaged in like mockery, or just straight out like just polemic against it. There's also a way of working against it that doesn't go directly against it, but preserves the good, uplifts the good, platforms the good, platforms the positive values, and does a lot of work saying, okay, here's the community that I want to preserve, and then here's all the complexities and the conversations and the way it goes, and the preservation mode. And then there's also the education mode that's a little bit stronger than that, and says, okay, here's the principal values. Here's how we get there, like philosophy, logic, and then here's the outgrowth, all the aesthetics and the art forms that are produced in this culture, and like more educative and stuff like that. Yeah,
well, I'd say like there's I think one of the good things to do would be to pinpoint certain ideas within postmodernism that I know. I'm actually going to produce a video eventually on some of the good things within postmodernism. Like, I actually do think that Foucault's idea of heterotopia, this concept of heterotopia, of like a mirrored reality, an alternate reality within a reality, like in between the borders between one culture and another. And I'm applying this concept, like you had the boarding school experience, right? So at the same time, you have in the dominant culture, if you will, according to Foucault, you have kids going off to school, and they're going and they're being taught in a safe environment. There's parental oversight, authority. They have a lunch prepared for them, or they bring their lunch. Then they're released back home. There's always a safe environment. They're taken care of. There's knowledge dispersion happening there. There's objective standards. There's always some sort of oversight. Then you also have this heterotopic reality that's happening at the same time, with Native Americans being shipped sometimes 500, 1,000 miles, 2,000 miles away from their reservation. I mean, ripped from their homes, completely ripped. That was the split actually within my tribe, the Hopis, was that my great uncle, him and the 19 traditionalists, they opposed the boarding school experience. And so you have this Native kid who's 5 years old, this little boy or girl, gets their head cut, shaved, everything. They're crying, screaming, and they're sent off to a boarding school. They're whipped, beaten. There's no parental oversight, and it's even such horrible things as if the child gets smallpox or dies, all the parents get is a letter in the mail that's sorry to inform you that your child's died, and so you can come visit the gravesite. I mean, this is horrible stuff. If there's a whole bunch of literature about this as well, but it's so I think when I'm getting back to my point here, I do this all the time. I get off on these tangents.
I love it.
But there's so like Foucault's idea of heterotopia, I think really is good there, because it kind of, I'm not saying that the concept in itself is like we need to hold to it an absolute principle, but it does, as an idea, it gives you a different lens to see reality through. You grasp my point.
How does that idea of heterotopia encapsulate the boarding school or the assimilationist?
Well, because you've got you've got two realities. You've got a secure, safe setting where children are being oversaw with parental authority, and you have this completely opposite, alternate, in between the lines of reality that's taking place, where kids are basically being abducted from their homes. And I've told people like this: would you, as a parent, allow the federal government into your home, or would you fight against them to rip your children from your own clutches, from your own hands, and be shipped away, to a boarding school to have their mouth washed out with soap if they spoke the language, to completely destroy the culture from within, is the part of the assimilation era. And that's actually what I see happening. In my next video, I'm going to be talking about the pedagogy of discomfort. It's another concept, is that I see that as I don't if I say this, I don't want to offend everybody, but it's almost as if these far left progressives have just reinvented the technique of assimilation again with this concept, this critical pedagogy. And I know for them, they think they know this is liberation. It's like, no, from my point of view, this whole a tearing down of someone's belief system, this deconstructing of their tradition, that's actually this is the same thing that already took place in the 1880s, 1890s, up to the 1920s and 30s. It's a part of this assimilation era. And it's like, wait, you've simply regurgitated what we've already gone through. Why, it's not just.
Yeah, but now the kids are going to do it to their parents.
Yeah, exactly, from the bottom up.
Yeah.
I shouldn't be laughing. That's actually very tragic. That's what's happening now. Yeah, it's
pernicious. It's and at least at this point, the entire country is going to go through it. So. Well,
yeah, exactly.
The white culture is going to be destroyed along with it. So,
it's like we're leveling. We're just rearranging chairs on the Titanic or something.
Yeah. You have so much going on. It sounds like you're really throwing yourself into this work.
Yeah,
and it seems like you're in this kind of third period, or maybe the ripening of the second period. You mentioned three periods. What were they? The aesthetic?
There's the aesthetic period, the ethical period, and then the religious period. And Kierkegaard says that these three stages of existence kind of jive up with like youthhood. Like you're living for the moment, just the here and now. The hikek-nuk, you're just constantly
hikek-nuk.
You're just partying. You know what I mean? And it's like, some people don't go through that at all. I did. I was a complete moron. I lived for the Fridays and Saturdays. That's why I got in construction, because as an electrician, I could get paid on Fridays, and that was it. I didn't have to work the weekends. I could just blow my paycheck. I was a total moron. Oh, no. And then still am. And then. It's like the next stage of existence is if you end up, it's like that hedonistic paradox is what it is. Like there's the pleasure principle applied to its extreme. Like if you're constantly waking up hungover and tired, eventually you reach a point where it's like, okay, do I need to adopt this Epicurean lifestyle where I mitigate and balance my hedonistic pleasure, or do I move on to the next stage, into like the ethical stage, like a higher plane of existence? That there's more than just pleasing myself, there's more than just partying. So there's also the ethical stage, is that there's this next stage where you realize you try to become enculturated. You study art and culture. You start reading books, and then a lot of people will stay in that stage. It was just fine. Kierkegaard's not saying these are absolute principles. There's no clear boundary here. And then the next stage is the religious stage, where you start realizing that it's not enough just to study art and literature and politics, that there has to be something underneath it that grounds it, that gives it meaning. Like I really look at it today as like we're in a crisis of meaning, and that everybody's struggling really tenaciously, because we're human, to figure out what is my story, what is my plot in life? What is there more to it that I'm just supposed to make stuff up in my head and just believe it against, that's like this existential leap. And so Kierkegaard talked about the religious stage, and this is why I disagree with him. And I think his book, Fear and Trembling, is an amazing book, and his understanding of what happened to Abraham in the Old Testament. But I don't agree with his definition of faith. I never believed in this faith as just you close your eyes and you just jump, and it's just existential leap. I don't view that. I view faith and God, our creator, is based upon evidence, reason. It's there's actual substance there. It's not just, I'm just going to hold my nose and jump into the deep end. So yeah. Yeah, so I would definitely say that's I'm probably like in the third stage now of my existence.
Huh. Well, how does that tie into becoming a teacher then, which is kind of what you're doing, or at least a journalist, in the very, very least?
Well, that was the thing, is I actually was going back to college. My goal was to get my doctorates at that time. This is like, now this was probably 15 years ago, was to get my doctorates in either economics and then either a minor in literature or in philosophy. And so I passed into all these higher level classes, and it was the opposite of what I was like. Wait, I'm missing Monday Night Football, going to night school, and instead there's no substance here. I wasn't being taught anything that I didn't already know. I'm not saying because I'm brilliant, because I'm not, but it was like the teachers in my classroom, this is back then in the early 2000s, they were busy proselytizing their positions. And I'm like, this is not what I didn't sign up for this. And I did have some really good teachers. I had a really great American Indian law teacher and a great teacher on the French Revolution. That's what sparked studying the French Revolution.
You should have them on.
Yeah, I know. If I can get a hold of them. Yeah, I have my old professor's contacts. He's just a phenomenal professor. But so that's where my actual goal was. I think I discovered early in my late 20s that I wanted to be a teacher. That I was like, I'm going to get out of the construction trade and get into teaching. And then I went to school for it, and I was just like, okay, I'm seeing the writing on the wall. This is not what I want to do. So I was like, I don't want to. I became like a guerrilla teacher, guerrilla warfare teacher, and teaching behind enemy lines, if you will.
Pirate professor.
Yeah. So, and then, like I said, I'm a generalist. And this is one of my fundamental beliefs, is that, knowledge is one thing and it's important, but wisdom is everything. Here's knowledge and here's wisdom. Wisdom is everything. If you don't integrate that knowledge into other sectors, on the word I'm looking for here, but you're missing out on so much more. It's like, I'm going to criticize somebody, but like Fauci is definitely an expert in his field, but you need to be able to pull that chunk of information out and apply it consistently as a whole, as a holistic, belief system. And I fear that's where, with this notion that and I've seen throughout history, you've had experts speak upon a certain topic, and they're really good in that topic, but once you get them out of that field, it's a nightmare. It's like they're constantly wrong. It's like that. I think we need a more generalistic approach to knowledge. That's kind of also what I'm trying to provide. But yeah, I think so that's my path to it. I figured I created the channel for my friends, basically, but also as a way for selfishly to just get my own ideas out there into the world and see what happens.
Have some influence.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a way to fulfill my own calling to be a teacher. Yeah. And like I said, I am not an expert on any subject. If I learn something, I have to really dig deep into the minutiae and get down into it before I feel comfortable finally bringing it out into the world. So that's why I go so long without posting a video, because I want to make sure that I'm actually grasping this. I don't want to be one of those guys who's just putting out material and then it gets refuted. No. Not you, Benjamin. You're really...
No, that's kind of what I do, though.
No, you don't. No, you don't. Actually, you do really good work. You do. I followed you probably for about 9 months to a year. I think. Yeah, it's probably about a year, because no, it's been longer than that. Yeah, it's been longer than that. But I think once we got the whole COVID thing hit, we got sent home from work where I work at. And it was just like, okay, YouTube 24/7. And it was just like, okay, I just started discovering all these different great channels. Like, oh my gosh, these are really good. So yeah, no, you do fantastic work. I
wasn't fishing for a compliment. I was making fun of myself.
No, man. Like that episode that you were just riffing, I was like, dude, this guy's got really good stuff. I was just constantly writing stuff down and researching. And then I actually went and bought the book for my son to have him read Infinite Jest. It's just like, it's also, it's just, that to me is the beauty of learning. This whole YouTube community is, if it lasts, is that it's just like this constant bombardment of dynamic ideas bouncing off each other. And that to me is what learning is about. That's what education really is is that you have someone who embodies those like three principles of ethos, pathos, and logos, and that they come across as that they're caring and that they don't overreach their they don't overstep their boundaries, and that there's this logical presentation of the material. And it's just that, to me, that's the whole beauty of the learning stuff. That to me is like, when I learn something, I have this urge to want to share it with everybody. And it's like, that's probably very annoying to everybody else. But it's like, I just, like, I learned something. I was like, oh my gosh, you got to hear it. And they're like, oh my God, please, Jason, shut up. So,
well, see, that's the real beauty, the positive beauty of this terrible technology that we have now, this social media stuff, is that you get to not just annoy your close fellows, you get to annoy everybody.
Exactly.
And in casting your pearls to all the animals, you'll find the ones that are your style.
I figure eventually I'll start getting some good criticism on my channel. I'll be like, oh wow, what is this? I'm too old to care about like what people. I mean, I care about what people say. I don't want to say that, but
you're looking for the substantive pushback in some way.
Yeah, if you leave a comment on my channel and you're like, you're an idiot, it's like, wow, consider the source. I don't really care. I've been through too much in life to worry about what you're going to say. That's like, I think James Lindsay was saying on your last, with you and Wokel, or was the previous one, about we just need people to stand up and be courageous. And that's what shocked me, as I was talking to a very good friend of mine, and we both had the same view that there'd be more people coming out of the woodwork with the whole shutdowns, with the economy, with the COVID restrictions. And I was just kind of, I guess, naive, thinking that most people valued freedom and that they'd all rise up against it. And then I start realizing that there's a lot of people that don't want to speak out about anything. They agree in private with you, but when it comes to a public, presentation of it, which I mean, I get, I'm not critiquing that, but it's like, man, speak out if you see injustice. I don't, I was raised where my dad used to teach me that, a brave man dies once, but a coward dies multiple times. And it's like you just stand up, for what's right and in what you believe in. So I don't know. I just look at what's going on right now is like, and this is a thing. I don't know if the more I plug into Twitter, is it a problem in Twitter or is it a problem in the world? It's like, okay, what am I in a simulation here, or is this something that's actually? Because I've talked to a lot of people, even within my own family, who don't believe that it's as big as a problem as it is. I'm like, no, trust me, it is. Like even Coca-Cola is doing this. Even all these companies are instituting these programs, and it's like. And once I start talking about that, like I think you said earlier, like the whole civil rights movement, I've had to tell people like, no, this is not. And I've actually had people say, how could you be against this movement when it's just an extension of the civil rights movement, critical race theory? I'm like, no, it's not. I can show you explicitly where they disavow that movement, where they criticize Martin Luther King's colorblind speech, where they criticize people from using it. There's actually explicit areas within certain books that I can show you that this is not, they disavow that completely. They look at that as being too incremental, not working, and based upon a completely different foundation or worldview. So I tell people that, and it's like, and that's I guess part of the teaching part of it. Like this is, because I do view this, like for now my channel is devoted to this critical race theory stuff, because I really do view this as dangerous, and that we've got to try to mitigate this or stop it in its tracks, because civilization is, to me, teetering on the edge right here. Like if we go down this road, and it's happened to other cultures, it's happened to, the Bolshevik Revolution, the cultural struggles of Mao's Chinese Cultural Revolution. In 1848, there was a bunch of revolutions that happened across the board and throughout Europe. So everywhere you start looking, you start seeing that these ideas have powerful consequences, and they can have disastrous consequences for society. So,
So, I'm sorry to lean so heavily on your native ties and your native ism and that part of you. But just topically, how do we go forward in a United States? What do you think is the most important thing for the average American citizen to understand about the relationship between America and the tribes, and what we need to fix about that, and how we should, conceive of the problem, conceive of the tensions, let's say, instead of just throwing it all in a problem, and then start to go towards a path towards uniting that.
Yeah. See, this is where, again, it's because there was the termination era within Native American Indian country where the federal government was going to abolish the tribes and just give out the land to the natives, which almost sounds exactly what I'm going for, but it's not, because we've also seen throughout history, like with Andrew Jackson with his blatant disregard of the Supreme Court decision, which became the Trail of Tears. So what I'm saying is that it's almost like we also need injunction, or not injunction, but understanding at the federal level, but that doesn't take away from the state level, because the state, let's say the federal government says we're going to pull back and let you run your own tribe. Well, then that is still another level of potential problem or tyranny, which is the state level, because we saw that in Georgia back in the 1820s and 30s and 40s. So I guess my overall point is that there's multiple levels where we need to push for justice and reform of the law, but I think it just comes down to education and educating people about like I said, like this is why I'm trying to bring in economics into my platform and to my channel, is that there's a whole school called New Institutional Economics, which deals with institutions, not just formal institutions, but informal institutions. And this is where I have really fascinating talks with a lot of Native people, is that they'll actually disagree with their own tribal government or their tribal policy, but they're like trying to figure out how to critique their tribe without giving. It's almost like they're walking this tightrope. They want to critique maybe the practices or customs or some of the actual ancient traditions that they think is holding the tribe back, but they've got to be very careful, because they don't want to seem as if they're buying into the dominant cultural critique. You know what I mean? And also at the same time, they don't want to relinquish what they feel is their uniqueness as Native people. So they're trying to work out at the same time this kind of dynamic interplay between tradition and change. And modernization
without
exactly,
the liquidation of
and so that's
the flavor of that culture.
So that's another thing. So I think, and then also for me personally, like there's a whole school of economics called public choice economics, which actually takes the beliefs or the ideas or concepts from economics and applies it to the federal government or to any state government, any government agency, if you will, and says that there's a principal agent problem, there's asymmetry of information, there's these problems in one-size-fits-all models. And to me, that's exactly where I think exposing that, getting that idea, giving it to light beyond just the academia, because a lot of times I come across these ideas and it's just like you only hear about it in the ivory tower of academia, and it hasn't trickled out to the mainstream of culture, and then it hasn't even trickled out at all to Native culture. It's a completely like foreign concept. I'm not saying that
the wrong ones trickled out.
You unleashed the wrong virus. Exactly.
You didn't do the one that turns us into superheroes.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. So I think it comes down to education, but I don't mean education in like a
formalized sense.
I guess this is where I'm looking at the opportunity with YouTube and however this goes, is being a platform to get those ideas out there, because there's a lot of very valuable ideas, and I view economics as being just as based upon indubitable laws, just as physics is, like the law of supply and demand. There's certain laws that you can't violate. That if you violate them, there's a consequence to them. I mean, you can say in your mind, I don't believe in the law of gravity, but as soon as you jump out of a window, gravity's going to take over. You can violate the law of supply and demand. You can inflate the money supply, but there's there's actually a negative consequence to that. Eventually, we're going to reap the horrible benefits of it, or the consequences. Yeah. So, I would say that for me, or for natives in general, I would say it's to become more adept at some of these great theories out there, these great ideas and concepts that would benefit tribes. And I think right now there's a lot of work being done in the legal sense, where a lot of tribes are trying to figure out ways to expand their sovereignty on their community. But it's that tightrope. It's not just a tightrope of themselves struggling how to create their own identity, but that tightrope also of the overlap between federal and state, because there can still be, throughout the history of Native culture, just because the federal government says we're going to protect you, a state can say, no, we don't care. We're going to, like, to this day, I know Native people to this day that will, if they get a $20 bill with Andrew Jackson's face on it, they'll flick the face. Or if you ever see a $20 bill with the X'd out, that's because it's usually, I mean, that's not always, but that's usually because they still to this day can't stand Andrew Jackson, for what he did.
Yeah. There's also a tightrope between, I guess, like with any of these, the truth of actual harm that has been perpetrated against the Native communities by the United States government and by the people in the government. There's a tightrope to be walked between owning up to that and going towards settling that bad blood or somehow exhausting that bad blood. And there's something very pernicious that wants to capitalize on that without ever, like, even kind of trying to concentrate that bad blood. And I worry about that. And I think part of the solution for me is to run towards my ignorance and run towards my discomfort in my own time, my own way, but run towards the problem and really looking at it, seeing all these consequences and trying to find something just really practical about that. Like what I learned, probably the biggest takeaway, not that I'm trying to hierarchicalize your knowledge or anything, was just the property thing. Like, how can these communities build wealth without property? And what is the ramifications of not actually having property? Like, I can't imagine and I don't want to adopt this framework beyond this one statement, but the privilege that I have to just have property is phenomenally more powerful and potential. Yeah. And to be in a state where I don't have access to that. No, I have this idea of land that's spiritual, right? Which I don't really have. I don't have that kind of connection to a land other than an aesthetic enjoyment of that. Yeah, no, I'd much rather have that, Western European property relationship with my property.
Well, see, that's the thing too. Is I mean, I know that. How can I say I look at some of the ideas that came out of the West or Western civilization as, I mean, maybe it's a misnomer, but they're universal. Like the idea of property rights, that definitely was born out of the West and and how it's applied, but it's a principle that should be applied universally to all people. You should have the ability to own your own property, and do with as you please, as long as you're not harming anybody. But I also
if you look at how that principle works, like in a culture that's not the West, I don't want to pull an Asian country out of the hat, but an Asian country that takes up property rights, and then you compare it to an Asian country that doesn't do that or has a centralized authority.
Look at Hong Kong, Yeah. Well, Hong Kong's a perfect example. They have zero natural resources, just about, and it's a thriving, booming economy. And it's because the institutions there are conducive to producing prosperity, and it feeds on itself. It's just motor that takes over. Yeah. But I don't know why in my mind when we're talking I think of like going back to literature, some of the reasons why I like the Western canon so much is because most of my favorite books, they tie into that what ties us together as human beings. Like, I'm thinking in my mind, like The Merchant of Venice, when Shakespeare puts into the mouth of Shylock, do not bleed. Am I not just like you in every way? If you prick us, do we not? That's what if you prick us, do we not bleed? If you wrong us, will we not revenge? There's all, it's like that to me is like a classic encapsulation of the great themes in literature that tie us together, that have this great conversation that we can have with one another. Mm-hmm. But back to your question, what you were saying is that I almost feel like I won't say no. Actually, what was your question again?
I can't remember. I'm just like you. I'm
literally this is what happens. Even on the podcast, this is why I had to edit the first one we did with Don, is that we went off on a tangent, and I'm like, man, I don't even know how we started this, And it's like we were so far removed from a review of James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose's book. It was just like, what would we, I don't know. So I was like, okay, I'm going to have to edit this out because I didn't know what we were talking about. So anyway, sorry.
Yeah. No, I was just talking about property. I was just talking about just little insights into kind of cutting off the infinite vengeance at the pass in a way, and saying, okay, well, what needs to be done, what was done, and just have a very clear understanding of that. And I'm not going to allow people, I'm not going to feel guilty. I'm just not going to. I'll feel sympathy and extend what sympathy's worth, but I'm not going to feel guilty. I'm not going to do that because I don't trust because I know that that's one way that I'm going to be manipulated. That was the biggest lesson from Evergreen, was that once you start to play this privilege oppression game, you're handing over your guilt and your shame to this other authority, and I want to keep those close because they're important to me. They get out of hand for sure. I don't regulate them perfectly, but they are my regulatory apparatus called my conscience. And I'm not going to hand that over to anybody else or to a grand narrative. I'm not going to do that. But there's a way of respectfully preserving the history, honoring that, and then moving forward from there, and just looking at very simple, direct solutions like economic solutions, philosophical solutions. And
I know what it was now, but it's like even within Native culture, there's never been a one size fits all. Like I think a lot of people have assumed that Natives held property in collective. They didn't. There was, like, you go to the West Coast, some of the fishing tribes, their fishing rights were very, you could say, very pre-Western. They were the predated, where they would share fishing rights amongst families and would rotate. Or you look at, even like the notion that all tribes were hunter-gatherers. It's like, no, Hopis were farmers. That's completely that's theory being applied to a culture and this is one of my problems when I come across some favorite pet theories of academics, which is critical race theory is one of them, is that they apply this theory and they selectively handpick what they want to include to bolster and support their theory. And it's like, no, this is you haven't done your homework. There's a lot of other examples out here. So I think one of the things, also tying back to your earlier question of education, is that also reaffirming with Native people that there's one tribe that practices their culture this way, and then the fact that you have these heterogeneous tribes that completely have their own encapsulated culture within itself doesn't mean that that's beautiful in itself, but that's kind of my broader point of that that diversity of a culture. This tribe is different than this tribe, and then this tribe than this tribe. Also points to the fact that they consider themselves natives, but they're not this monolithic pliable concept that you have the right to then apply. Not speaking to you, but like critical race theory to absorb this into this. You're taking away their heterogeneity and applying this homogeneous glob to them. Yeah. And you're doing that's actually the most unjust part, because you're speaking for them, and that's like, no, that don't do that. Let them speak for themselves. Yeah. And then try to draw out from that this theory, but instead we have this opposite. We're having this theory applied, imposed upon them, and I think that's. So again, right now, I just did it again. I was going to tie into something you had just said, and now my mind just goes to
bing, boom. Well, and well, okay. This is another whole conversation we can get into at another time, but it seems like there are certain concepts that can be applied universally, and certain concepts that shouldn't be applied universally. So, to what degree can certain aspects of modernism preserve the heterogeneity and the difference between all these tribes and within all these tribes, preserve that, and yet maximize productivity, maximize potential? Are there certain,
I would say, again,
you have to navigate that. Again.
I would say just give that right back to the tribes. Let them determine that for themselves. That's the most basic principle. That's my whole channel, Native Liberty, is that give them the freedom to figure out the things for themselves. Give every tribe, if this tribe wants to go along this collective path and own property in a communal aspect. And if it works or it doesn't, that's on them. You know what I mean? And don't try to apply from Washington, from DC, this one-size-fits-all model, which we've seen historically always fails every time it's applied, because you're squashing that uniqueness of each culture or tribe or people. So that's my biggest thing, is that allow the tribes to determine for themselves what they want to do. Give them their own autonomy, just like you give everybody else. And if they want to bundle the resources together and they squander it, well, at least the tribe did it themselves, and at least they can own that, so. Yeah.
I think one of the another aspect of CRT, or critical theory, that's so pernicious. One, it infects the brains of individuals, but two, it's very well suited to institutions to just roll out this whole equity thing. It's like, okay, we're going to extract your resources and do it better than you could,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's pretty much
them better than you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
With a bunch of moral rhetoric all wound up in there.
Yeah, somebody made a comment on one of the video I put up, and it was the not purity principle, purity spiral, and that's kind of that's the first time I heard that term, and how it can take over a movement, and the movement ends up being filtered through this, and it's not really morality, it's the principle itself takes a hierarchical priority over everything else. And it's like that's like that. I don't want that. I want the opposite of that. I want how can I say? I want there to be morality, but not implied in a very legalistic sense of like where it takes. I guess like I'm trying to think of the distinction in my mind between the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. You can apply so strictly to the letter of the law that you violate the spirit that it was written in. And I think that's kind of what's happened within Native communities, because of this federal oversight constantly at every level. So it's
goddamn Pharisees.
you got my reference. Wow. That's
well,
good.
It is Easter.
Wow, Benjamin. Yeah. Today.
You got to give the not devil his due.
Yeah, that's kind of the same. Yeah, it's exactly the principle I'm thinking of in my mind. Yeah, exactly.
Well, Jason, we should do this again. Thank you for your time and your mind and your work, and I hope that people get turned on to what you're doing and you get a bigger following that you maybe don't want, or maybe do want, or maybe have this weird relationship to your desire.
I'm all for it, man. Whatever happens, case or raw. No, hopefully next time I'll have my mind prepared better. I'm all over the place. I'm just like a jumble of atoms firing all at once.
Yeah, don't worry about it. I'm the exact same thing. That's why I have James Lindsay and Wokel on. They can just like go through the trenches, and I kind of just chariot on top of them, and every once in a while tug the bit this way or that way gently.
Well, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Yeah, Alan, thank you for you and James a shout out on your episode about 2 weeks ago. I was like, well, I was eating the Chipotle burrito and watching the channel. I was like, whoa, I was like, what's happening? What?
Man, I'm glad I'm not that popular, because every time I see myself on social media, like somebody mentioning me, I'm like, I just get this complete panic. Like, oh crap, what happened? Is it happening now? Is the cancellation upon me? Has it finally come?
Oh, man. Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'm going to end the recording. Congratulations for reaching the end of the discussion. If you enjoyed it, do be sure to leave a review or a comment or a thumbs up or whatever you need to do to show that glorious algorithm that this is some good stuff. And do be sure to go and check that back catalog, as it is brimming full of fantastic conversations. Links to provide monetary support are down there in the description as well. Have a good night.